got a bot for now.
Check this shit.
Counter.
What is this?
Bomb has been planted.
Taph, the emoji guy, is sort of the black sheep of the survivors. He's classified in-game as a support, but that's kind of misleading. Sure, he does look like your typical support on the surface, being able to flashbang the killer and cosplay as a spider with 7,000 tripwires, but at the same time, he plays more like a survivalist, being able to set himself up in an advantageous spot and just not interact with the killer unless they come to him, and being very good in LMS as long as he actually has his traps out. Kinda like Noob having all of his colas available. Interjection. That doesn't apply anymore. But he also somewhat fits into a sentinel role, with his trip mines having the ability to completely disorient a killer for a second or so, and having killers look out for trip mines thrown in front of them so they can avoid the status like they would a stunner. But despite having aspects of every role, he doesn't exactly fit neatly into any of them. In fact, he has a lot more alike with John Doe than any of the other survivors. He was even classified as a sentinel in the code for like a week or so when he first released. Speaking of when he first released, a lot of people were disappointed with how he seemed to suck complete ass at launch, which is true to an extent. Getting hit by a subspace explosion at release was basically like a 3-year-old throwing a water balloon at your face, so you're slightly inconvenienced for a second before you wipe it away. But it was also a majority of people just not really knowing how to properly use him at the time. Now, after most people have stopped playing him, he's gotten a buff that makes him a hell of a lot stronger, and people aren't talking about it enough in my opinion. Before we talk strats, let's talk stats. He has a 2-star difficulty, sharing the lowest in the game with Shadletsky and Elliot. He is 90 HP, as I was editing, the Friday the 13th update dropped, and he kinda got buffed from 90 to 100 HP. That's all he got, but it's a decently noticeable buff. And basically the same stats as everyone else otherwise. 12 walking speed, 24 sprinting, 100 stamina, 10 loss, 20 gain per second. Par for the course. Now, far more interestingly, his moveset. First move, his Tripwire. With a 25-second cooldown, you place a pole into the ground where you're standing and start scuttling across the floor at a reduced speed to wherever you decide to place the second stake, creating a gray translucent line between the two. You can only have 3 out at a time, and they vanish at around 80 or so seconds of being out. The wire can't go through solid objects like walls or other tripwires, but stuff like grass with no collision is fair game. The stakes can't be placed in the air or in a radius around any other stakes, but the tripwire itself, as long as it doesn't go through any solid objects, can go through air as much as it likes. As the tripwire is placed, the wire part slowly gets less and less visible, but never fully disappears. If El Hilario runs over it, they get slowness 2 for 4 seconds, and, more importantly, their aura gets revealed for 8 seconds. Taph is the only way in the game, besides Last Man Standing, to see the killer's aura, so that instantly boosts his usability a lot. Now, purely from how I've described it, the tripwire has got to sound insanely good, being kinda hard to see, growing harder to see as time passes. But if you've actually played as or against Taph, you know how piss easy it is to spot the wire if the killer is paying a modicum of attention. This then compounds with how goddamn fragile they are, only having 20 HP and getting destroyed by just anything that touches it. But that's not exactly to say it's bad, it just needs a little help from something else, namely his other ability. Subspace Trip Mine. It's as advertised. He throws one out with a 40-second cooldown, and like the actual gear, it loses opacity as it's set down. Unlike the actual gear, it doesn't go completely invisible, but it does blend in surprisingly well with how complicated it is. Though it does pulsate every 16 seconds, becoming slightly more visible and glowing a blinding pink. If it isn't interacted with for a length of time, it explodes prematurely. What is this length of time? I have no fucking idea. The wiki says it's 35 seconds, but I've tested it, and that's definitely wrong, because it's lasted upwards of 50 seconds from my testing. This is making me wonder if the tripwire time frame was wrong, but that doesn't really matter with how much you're going to be spamming new tripwires anyways. Either or, after a while it explodes no matter if the killer is close or far from it. If the killer approaches beforehand, it takes around half a second and then detonates, giving the killer, and Taph if he's near it, subspace 3 for 5 seconds. Subspaced is cool and all, it makes the killer sort of disoriented and their screen all pink, but the real meat of this ability is from the helpless 1 it gives for 3 seconds. I'll go into why helpless makes Taph go from pretty alright to kind of busted in the right scenarios, but I'll do that later. Sadly, that wonderfully helpful helpless can be completely avoided if literally anything damages the trip mine. Even if the killer gets hit point blank by the explosion, as long as they give a little love tap before it explodes, their screen just gets ever so slightly color shifted pink and literally nothing else happens. Now, those moves by themselves are cool and all, but they can't really offer much if not used in harmony with each other. Let's go over first some very basic strategies. For tripwires, you usually only need to focus on hiding the stakes, as the wire itself blends into most places. Though it will stand out in dark areas, so try and build them on light gray floors, because that'll almost completely hide their presence. This is pretty well known at this point, but trip mines can actually trigger through walls, as long as the killer is within its hitbox, that being a big ass circle it's gonna hit, walls be damned. A good strat is to place it high up on a ledge that the killers have to walk past to get to where you are, but not so close that it can be hit. Unless they can see it, they can't really bait an explosion they don't know is coming, so it's a pretty good get out of jail free card. Those two are pretty basic strategies and pretty well known, but that is not why I'm making this video. Let's now get into the actual strategies. On most killers, they will either be forced to use an ability, wait a second or two, or simply tank the slowness of a tripwire if you do this one simple thing. Just stack them close together. Killers have cooldowns on their basic attacks, so if they break the first tripwire they see, no matter how obvious, they'll still have to break a second one, which they just can't do at that current moment. Sure, 1x4 can just mass infection and Jean Doe can use corrupt energy, but then you force them to use up an ability, which most likely won't hit you if you're kinda smart about it, and force them to stop mid-chase to use said ability while being in a disadvantageous spot to use it. I also like to pair this with the out of reach subspace, so even if they do destroy the tripwires with an ability, they'll just get blown up by the trip mine and can't break the other tripwires a few feet ahead of them due to their newfound helplessness. Now, that is a very good strategy, and goddamn does it work, but that only holds them back so long. What I prefer to do is to set up the twin tripwires in a good looping spot, then run to a nice one-off hiding location where I set up a trip mine and a tripwire. Then, once the killer sprints towards me, I run towards my other trap, which gets me a lot of distance, which is hard for the killer to make up. As you can imagine, killers can just break the tripwires and mines with abilities, especially 1x4 with his diabolically sized ranged hitboxes. Now what you may have noticed is that I failed to mention the other two killers in the game, namely Jason and Cool Kid, and that is for two extremely different reasons. Firstly, Jason. His main attack, unlike everybody else's, pierces. That means if confronted with a set of close tripwires, he can just attack once and break both of them in one swing, rendering it completely useless. Now you could just space them out a little bit more, but then Jason can just start regaining stamina after breaking the first one, and by the time he gets to the second one, he's going to have higher stamina and a free slash. You could slow him down with a third tripwire, making regaining stamina again basically pointless, but that's using a lot of resources in one area. The trip mine still works plenty fine in most situations, but if Jason is raging paced, he can just kind of ignore the traps, walk through all of them, and there's jack you can do about it. And now, moving from the 8-foot tall behemoth onto the child, This is one of the only times I'm ever gonna say Cool Kid is semi-countered by a character. He still has the main attack cooldown issue. Walk speed only hits one tripwire and has crazy end lag. And the one move that you think could easily deal with tripwires, Corrupt Nature, only does 15 damage of their 20 health. Now, he can hit trip mines in high places unlike other killers, but he can't do it very well if he can't see the trip mine. Plus, he's animation locked for half a second or so if he does that and loses one of his best moves for the 15 seconds it takes to cool down. Taph kind of flew under the radar after release, but he's honestly one of my favorite survivors. He's good and damn fun as well. I mean, call me a lunatic, but I might go as far as to say he's the ball.